folks, hope you all are doing well. I am Karan Bandal from Econosite, your weekly wrap on economic news from India and around the world. So let's get started. We'll begin with a story from India's neighborhood. Bangladesh seen on track to be a $1 trillion economy by 2040. A report by Boston Consulting Group came out on Bangladesh. It says that driven by consumer optimism, innovation in emerging economic sectors, and a young engaged workforce, Bangladesh GDP is on course to hit a $1 trillion mark by 2040. The country could have easily been overshadowed by its neighboring major powers like India and China, but in this region of powerhouses, Bangladesh stands tall. Bangladesh achieved an annual average growth of 6.4% between 2016 and 2021, outpacing South Asian peers like India, Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Thailand. It's roughly a $400 billion economy, GDP per capita exceeding that of even India, 170 million population with a median age of 28 years old, a young country, and with a two-third contribution. Consumption drives Bangladesh's economy, meaning economic composition is very similar to that of United States and India. All good signs, moving in the right direction. But there are challenges. Recent issue with liquidity that forced them to go to the IMF for help indicates the need to diversify its export sector. Foreign exchange situation and inflationary pressures may slow growth in the short term. Even in the presence of these headwinds, BCG report states that they are confident that this highly resilient economy will continue to demonstrate robust growth in the long term. With India and Bangladesh both projected to continue to grow at a decent clip, they can benefit greatly by expanding the trade between the two. And it is good for India that they have a fast growing, productive, and a friendly neighbor to its east. Let's come to India and look at a capex related story. Hope springs anew on private capex revival. In the past 2 decades, the best 5-year stretch that India has seen with regards to its economic growth has been between 2003 and 7, where the economy consistently grew by almost 8% every year. Then the global financial crisis began in mid-2007, infected India as well, although not as bad as it did the developed economies. India had its own problems that were revealed in the aftermath of the global financial crisis. India's banking sector was stuck with massive non-performing assets, and private capex almost ground to a halt. Many reforms were rolled out since then to clean up the balance sheet of the banking sector. Public sector banks were recapitalized, but private capex never recovered meaningfully even after 15 years since the crisis. In fact, the revival of private investment has been so weak that the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in September of this year expressed her frustration to industry leaders by asking point blank, "Since 2019 when I took charge of Finance Ministry, I have been hearing industry doesn't think that the environment is conducive. I want to hear from India Inc. What's stopping you?" This year, there are signs that the rebound is taking shape. On Thursday, Chief Economic Advisor V. Ananth Nageswaran said that our total private sector capital expenditure during April to September of 2022 had crossed 3 lakh crore rupees, and for the full financial year, it could hit 6 lakh crore rupees. He also added that this was a substantial improvement over the last 6-7 years record. According to new RBI data, non-food credit surged 18.3% from a year earlier since October of last year. Such a sharp jump is likely due to demand for loans from India Inc. If confirmed, this would mark a significant turnaround and demonstrate a rising confidence in the economy by the private sector. Provided the trend of rising private capex continues, the main driver of economic growth will be private capex. In that case, government need not spend much to stimulate growth. This will lead to a decline in fiscal deficit, in turn reducing the cost of capital for the private sector further and unleashing the virtuous growth cycle. Next, an update on India's Q2 GDP data. Manufacturing and mining sector drags down growth, Q2 GDP up 6.3%. Per NSO, that is National Statistics Office, per NSO data, India's economic growth slows down to 6.3% in Q2, that is July to September 2022 quarter. This is coming on the back of Q1 2022 GDP growth of 13.5%. That means average GDP growth so far during this financial year is 9.9%. We know from our recent few weekly wraps that India is projected to grow at around 6.5% during the full fiscal year ending on March 2023. So, for this projection to hold, India needs to maintain on average a GDP growth rate of 3.1% for the remainder of the financial year. Now, this does not seem like a daunting target, but looking at projected state of the global economy, it is certainly going to be a challenge. On a GDP related story, let's look at remittances. According to a World Bank report, India retains its spot as the world's top recipient of remittances. Remittance flows to India will rise 12% to reach $100 billion this year, an all-time high. Remittances account for nearly 3% of India's GDP, but more importantly, it is a key source of cash with regards to foreign exchange. Finally, with the talk of this global slowdown being in the news, I got curious about India's exports. Because if things are slowing down globally, it should show up in India's export data, right? If there is less global demand, India's export should fall. So, I pulled trade data from Ministry of Commerce and Industries website. I saw mixed signals. India's merchandise exports were up 12.5% to around $265 billion during the period April to October 2022 against the same period last year. Pretty good. But look at the most recent data. For just the month of October, merchandise exports were down 16.6% to $29.78 billion when compared with October of last year. This is just one data point. I don't know how exports of other major economies are doing, but since India is the fastest growing major economy, it is safe to assume exports from other countries are also suffering. India's services exports, however, are doing much better. Services exports rose 31.4% to around $181 billion during the period April to October 2022 against the same period last year. And even just for the month of October, services exports were also up 40.3% to $28.58 billion when compared with October of last year. So, merchandise exports were down for October, but services exports are up. In my view, this is also an indication of global slowdown, because when economy slows down in the Western nations, companies there begin to cut costs. So, they start outsourcing services to low cost countries. And India has proven itself a reliable and competitive outsourcing destination for the services of all kinds, from business process outsourcing to software development and even semiconductor chip design. In summary, with the projection of global slowdown next year, I think India's neighborhood to the east is doing okay, including the Southeast Asian bloc. Bangladesh in particular is not only holding its own, but outperforming India. India itself is projected to be a fastest growing major nation for the next 2 years, and private capex data kind of backs up that claim. Add to that, India is on track to receive an unprecedented amount of foreign exchange in the form of remittances this year. As an insurance, next year, even in case of global slowdown, India's services exports should be able to provide some cushion to India's falling merchandise exports. We'll track all these developments here together as they pan out. I hope you enjoyed this week's economic wrap. I'll speak with you again next week. Until then, take care.